The last train. There are always countless supernatural rumors surrounding the subway system, primarily because these tunnels are constructed deep underground, in the very bowels of the city where the yin energy is heaviest. In the past, these locations were often burial grounds for the dead. I initially refused to believe any of these ghostly subway legends, dismissing them as nonsense, but I happened to have a friend who actually experienced something inexplicable firsthand. It happened during the Chinese New Year when he was taking a late-night train back to his university. He was sitting in the very last carriage, and through the rear window, he could see directly into the dark tunnel receding behind them. Under the faint red glow of the subway's tail lights, he was shocked to see 4 people inside the tunnel, carrying a sedan chair and walking along the tracks, keeping pace right behind the moving train. These 4 figures were dressed in archaic clothing, resembling the costumes you might see in those old war dramas about the Japanese resistance, wearing odd hats and gaudy, colorful rags, carrying an old-fashioned wooden palanquin, following the train at a leisurely yet impossible pace. When he first told me this story, my immediate reaction was to call him a liar, because I am a staunch atheist and generally never believe in such paranormal events. It wasn't until some time later, when the news reported that a young night shift worker at the Yonghe Temple station also saw several people carrying a sedan chair in the tunnel, that I finally believed my friend's words and realized he wasn't just fear-mongering. There really are things in the subway that are unknown to the living. However, after riding the subway so many times without incident, I eventually encountered a supernatural event of my own. Last Saturday, I went to a high school reunion. Old classmates who hadn't seen each other in a long time gathered together to drink a little wine, and although my tolerance is terrible, I loved the atmosphere and ended up drinking nearly half a bottle of NIU liquor with them, until I couldn't handle it anymore and was walking unsteadily. By the time the drinking session broke up, it was already around 11 o'clock at night. I needed to take the subway back to my dormitory, and it happened to be exactly the time for the last train. I stumbled my way to the subway station, only to find that the entrance had already been sealed off with iron gates, and upon seeing this, I felt a mental breakdown coming on. There were no bus lines from there back to my university, and the fastest way was the subway. Because the distance was so far, taking a taxi would cost me at least 80 yuan, which was a fortune for a poor student like me. I certainly didn't want to spend that kind of money, but the subway doors were closed, and I had no other options. Or so I thought. Just as I was despairing, I suddenly noticed a small door next to the iron gate of the subway entrance. This small door was likely a passage reserved for subway staff, and right now it was left slightly ajar, unlocked, although the subway was technically closed to passengers. I reasoned that there must still be trains running inside, because the schedule said the last train departed after 11. And since it was just past 11 now, there had to be vehicles still in operation. With this thought in mind, and fueled by the alcohol surging in my system, I didn't fear being caught by staff and simply squeezed through that small door next to the iron fence. The escalators at the subway entrance had already stopped running, so I had to walk down the stairs at the side. The fluorescent lights inside the station were all extinguished, leaving only dim yellow night lights on, making me so dizzy I could barely see the steps beneath my feet. When I got down the stairs, there was no one at the security check position, and the X-ray machines had long been turned off. The entire station was devoid of human presence, with no sound other than the ventilation fans on the ceiling blowing loudly. I suddenly felt a creeping chill in my heart. But, as the saying goes, alcohol emboldens the coward, and with the cool breeze in the subway blowing on me, I immediately plucked up my courage and walked towards the platform. After walking for a while, my stomach started to churn and grumble, perhaps because I had run down too fast. Combined with the excessive alcohol, I felt a strong urge to vomit. Fortunately, the public restrooms in the subway were still open, so I rushed in and vomited violently for a while, emptying my stomach. The lights and billboards on the platform were all off, leaving only a few dim yellow night lights glowing on either side. The restroom was pitch black and dead silent, and apart from the sound of my own retching, I couldn't hear a single thing. After vomiting for a while, I stood up, wiped my mouth, and took out my phone to check the time. It was exactly 11:40 p.m. I started to feel uneasy in my heart, thinking that at this late hour, if I still hadn't seen a train, could it be that I had already missed the last one? I walked out of the restroom in confusion, feeling a bit dizzy after just 2 steps because my head was congested from hanging down to vomit for so long. I hurriedly felt my way through the dark to find a bench and sat down, rubbing my head while thinking about what to do. Worst case scenario, I would just go back the way I came and find an illegal taxi to get back to school, costing me a few dozen bucks at most. However, just then, I suddenly saw a piercing beam of light coming from inside the tunnel, and the roaring sound of a subway train gradually approached from the distance. The subway was here. I hadn't missed the last train after all. I quickly stood up and glanced at my phone. It was 11:55 p.m., a time when all lines should technically have ended operations, but I was incredibly lucky to encounter one. Amidst the whistling wind, the train pulled into the station, but as I looked at the long-awaited subway, I suddenly felt something was strange. Why were there no lights on inside this subway train? Except for the headlights on the front of the train, the carriages were completely dark. Inside, there were only a few flickering emergency lights, but their glow was obviously insufficient to illuminate the cabin, and from where I stood, those dim lights looked more like pairs of small eyes quietly staring at me. A chill rose straight from my heart because I had never seen a subway train running without lights. But before I could react, the train stopped at the platform, and with a beep 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 sound, the doors opened. After the doors opened, no one got off, and since I was the only person on the platform, naturally no one else got on. I looked at this pitch black train with fear, but this car was going exactly in the direction of my school. Should I get on or not? I considered it briefly and decided to board. So what if the lights were off? Maybe the subway company was just trying to save energy and reduce emissions. As soon as I got on, the doors beeped and closed, and the subway began to speed away. There was only the dim glow of the emergency lights, limiting my vision, but I could see that the seats within my range of sight were empty. I quickly found a seat because I was still dizzy from the alcohol. Not long after, we arrived at the next station. The subway slowly stopped, the doors opened, but still no one came up. And no one went down. However, I discovered a problem. Generally speaking, before arriving at a station, the subway broadcasts the name of the next stop, something like, "Welcome to line 1. The next station is XXX. Please prepare to exit," but the train I was sitting on played no such announcements. Instead, the broadcast speakers emitted a weird, rhythmic hissing sound, like a radio with no signal, only very quiet. Although I found it strange, I didn't pay much attention and just sat in my seat playing with my phone. After playing for a while, I suddenly heard a strange sound coming from the adjacent carriage. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like someone bouncing a ball. I was curious, so I quickly stood up and poked my head out to look into the next carriage. But it was pitch black there, seemingly without even emergency lights, so I couldn't see anyone at all. "Is anyone there?" I asked hurriedly. Thump, 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 thump. The sound of the bouncing ball continued, very rhythmic. "Who is there?" I boldly asked again, and after asking, I suddenly heard a crisp pop sound, followed by the sound of the ball bouncing towards me. The bouncing slowed down, eventually turning into a roll, and under the dim emergency light, I saw a small rubber ball rolling out from the adjacent carriage. It was only the size of a melon, and it rolled right to my feet. I bent down and picked it up, feeling that the ball was wet and sticky, covered in some unknown substance. Just as I picked it up, a little girl's voice came from the darkness of the next carriage. "Throw it back. You should throw it back." Hearing this, I realized there was a little girl on the last train, so I quickly obeyed her and threw the ball back towards the carriage where she was. The ball bounced on the floor a few times, rolled a bit, and then stopped. I heard the little girl over there seem to make a tisk sound of dissatisfaction, and then she said, "Not like that. Learn from me, watch." Then I heard the sound of the ball bouncing on the ground again, and I saw the ball bouncing towards me from the next carriage once more. I didn't expect this little girl to be so playful, so I quickly bent down to pick up the ball from the ground again, and following her instructions, I threw it back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the ball was incredibly sticky. Every time I touched it, my hand got covered in slime. It was too dark to see clearly what was on the ball, so I sniffed it and only smelled something slightly fishy and foul. After I threw the ball back, the little girl caught it, and this time she didn't criticize my throwing method, but instead let out a peal of silver bell-like laughter. Giggle, giggle. It seemed I had coaxed her into a good mood. Just then, the subway arrived at the next station, and there were a few lighting fixtures still on at this platform. Although the light wasn't intense, it was enough to illuminate the scene inside the carriage. Through the light coming from outside, I vaguely saw the scene in the adjacent carriage. A 5 or 6-year-old little girl was standing quietly in the car, holding a ball. She was originally wearing a white dress, but I saw that her face and her dress were completely covered in bright red liquid. It was blood. The little girl was covered in blood. The ball was covered in blood. And what I had just picked up, the sticky substance on my hands, was also blood. I was instantly panicked to the extreme, cold sweat pouring down my body. If I hadn't already vomited for so long in the restroom earlier, I definitely would have thrown up right then and there. The subway slowly stopped at the station. The doors opened with a beep beep beep, and I saw the little girl in the carriage suddenly smile at me.